The Young and the Restless spoilers shock. The storm that had been gathering over Genoa City finally broke that night, not just in the sky but within the hearts of everyone trapped in its relentless spiral. The hospital had become a fortress of fear and guilt, yet even its sterile walls could not contain the truth that was clawing its way to the surface. Matt had been haunting them like a specter, unseen, untraceable, but always close, always watching. For days he had sent silent messages, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the flicker of security lights, the faint scent of his cologne left on a stairwell rail. It was as if he wanted them to know he was near, to feel the weight of their own helplessness. Sharon had tried to keep herself calm for Noah's sake, but the strain was breaking her. She had already lost too much in life, Cassie, faith, marriages, years, and she couldn't lose another child, not to hatred, not to Matt's vengeance. Matt's obsession had crossed every line of reason. He no longer saw Noah as a man but as the embodiment of betrayal, the one who had shattered his home and corrupted Sienna, the woman he once believed would be his redemption. His love for Sienna had curdled into rage, his sense of justice into mania. He had become both executioner and victim of his own madness, a man whose grief had eaten away whatever humanity once lived inside him. He told himself that Noah deserved to die, that only blood could cleanse what had been done to him. But beneath the violence, there was something darker, an emptiness, an unspoken fear that everything he had built had been a lie from the very beginning. Nick had tried to stop him through the police, through force, through desperate appeals, but Matt always slipped through the cracks like smoke. Sharon knew that logic and law could not reach him anymore. The only thing that could break the cycle was truth, the one truth she had buried for years, the one that had eaten at her conscience like acid. She had kept it hidden to protect her family, but now, with Noah's life hanging in the balance and Matt threatening to finish what he started, she realized silence was no longer an act of mercy. It was complicity. It happened on a night heavy with rain, when thunder rolled across the city and lightning illuminated the hospital windows like flashes of divine judgment. Sharon had been sitting beside Noah's bed when she heard the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway, too slow, too deliberate. She froze. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the door creaked open. A shadow slipped inside, tall and lean, the familiar glint of madness flickering in his eyes. Matt was there, drenched from the storm, his face half hidden beneath the dim light. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The syringe in his hand said everything. Sharon rose slowly, her heart pounding so violently it drowned out the machines. "Don't," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Matt took another step forward, his hand shaking, his breathing ragged. "You don't understand," he muttered, his voice hollow. "He took everything from me. He ruined everything." Sharon's eyes darted toward Noah, still motionless, unaware of the chaos unfolding around him. She could see the hatred burning behind Matt's stare. It wasn't just vengeance anymore, it was despair, the kind that devours a man from within until only darkness remains. "Matt, please," Sharon begged, her voice breaking. "This won't fix anything. You'll destroy yourself." But he laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "I'm already destroyed. He made sure of that. And now he'll pay." He lifted the syringe. Sharon stepped forward, her body trembling with a force she couldn't control. For a moment, the two of them stood frozen, predator and protector, grief and guilt locked in a silent war. And then Sharon did the only thing she could. She screamed. Her voice cracked through the air like lightning, raw and piercing. "Stop it. Stop it right now." The sound startled him, made his hand falter. She saw his eyes widen in confusion, rage, pain. And then, in one trembling breath, she let the truth escape. "He's your son." The words hit him like a bullet. He froze completely, the syringe trembling in his hand. The room seemed to tilt, the machines, the rain, the thunder, all sound vanished. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Matt's face went pale, his eyes darting from Sharon to Noah, as if he were seeing both for the first time. What did you say?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Sharon reached into her coat pocket with shaking hands and pulled out a folded envelope, worn, creased, and stained with tears. She threw it toward him, her voice hoarse. "Look at it, Matt. Read it. You wanted the truth? There it is." The paper landed on the floor between them. Matt stared at it for a long moment before bending down, his hands trembling so violently that he almost tore it open. Inside was a DNA report, the one Sharon had hidden for over 20 years. His eyes scanned the words, and when he reached the conclusion, his knees gave way. The syringe fell from his hand, rolling across the floor. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking apart. That can't be," but the truth stared back at him, cruel and undeniable. Paternity match, 99.8%. Noah was his son. The boy he had tried to murder was his own flesh and blood. Tears streamed down Matt's face, mixing with the rain that clung to his skin. The rage that had driven him for so long cracked open, revealing the hollow core of grief beneath. He looked at Noah, at the boy who had inherited his eyes, his quiet intensity, the same stubborn spark of life he once admired in himself. And in that moment, something inside him broke completely. His breath came in sharp, ragged gasps as memories flooded his mind. Sienna's confession, Sharon's distance, the way Noah had always seemed familiar in a way he couldn't explain. The puzzle pieces snapped together too late, the picture forming into a nightmare he could never undo. Sharon's tears fell freely as she stepped closer. "I wanted to tell you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But you were gone. You were already losing yourself, and I couldn't bring that truth into your darkness. I thought I was protecting him. I thought I was protecting you." Matt shook his head violently, his hands clutching his hair. "You let me hate him," he choked. You let me want to kill him." His voice cracked under the weight of his own horror. "What kind of monster am I?" Sharon's voice softened, breaking under its own weight. "The kind that can still stop this." Matt turned back to Noah's bed, his eyes wide and wet with disbelief. He stumbled forward, his hand hovering over his son's chest, afraid to touch him, as if contact might shatter the fragile barrier between life and death. "My God," he whispered. "What have I done?" The machines hummed softly, the faint beeping marking the fragile rhythm of Noah's heartbeat. The sound hit Matt like a dagger. Each pulse was a reminder of the crime he had nearly completed, of the innocence he had tried to destroy. For the first time, he fell to his knees beside the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Sharon watched in silence, her heart breaking for both of them. Nick burst into the room moments later, gun drawn, his face white with fury and fear. But when he saw Matt on the floor, broken and crying, the weapon slowly lowered. He didn't see a killer anymore. He saw a man crushed beneath the unbearable truth of what he had done. "It's true," Sharon said softly, her voice shaking. "He didn't know. Noah's his son." Nick stared at her in disbelief, his lips parting as the enormity of it sank in. The police arrived soon after, alerted by the commotion, but Sharon begged them not to shoot. Matt didn't resist. He didn't run. He simply sat there, clutching the DNA report in his hands, whispering Noah's name over and over like a prayer. When they took him away, his eyes never left his son's face. The rain outside had turned into a downpour, drumming against the hospital windows like a requiem. Sharon collapsed into Nick's arms, her body trembling. "It's over," she whispered. But she knew it wasn't. Truth had ended the killing, but it had opened a wound that would never fully heal. Days later, Noah's condition began to improve. The doctors said the poison's effects were fading, that his brain was slowly regaining activity. Sharon refused to believe it was coincidence. She sat by his side, holding his hand, whispering the story he hadn't yet heard, about the father who had hated him, the truth that had saved him, and the love that still surrounded him despite everything. When Noah's eyes finally fluttered open, Sharon wept like a child. His first word was faint but clear, "Mom." Somewhere in a holding cell miles away, Matt sat alone in the darkness, the DNA report folded in his trembling hands. The man who had wanted revenge had vanished. In his place was a father drowning in remorse. The knowledge that he had nearly killed his own son would haunt him forever. But perhaps, in some quiet way, that torment was the only justice left. Sharon visited him once. No guards, no anger, just silence between two people bound by secrets and sorrow. When she slid the photograph of Noah onto the table, Matt broke again. "He's alive," she said softly. "You didn't take him from me. There's still time to be something other than what you've become." He didn't answer. He simply stared at the picture, tears blurring his vision, whispering the name that would define the rest of his life, Noah. Outside, Genoa City carried on, as it always did, bright lights hiding dark hearts. But within the Newman family, nothing would ever be the same. The truth had saved Noah's life, yet it had also destroyed the fragile illusions that had kept them whole. Sharon knew she had done the right thing, but right and good were not the same. The world now knew that Matt was Noah's father, and with that revelation came consequences no one could yet foresee. But as she looked at her son breathing, alive, the storm finally easing beyond the windows, she decided that truth, no matter how painful, was worth everything it cost. The sterile silence of the hospital was broken only by the rhythmic pulse of the machines that kept Noah tethered to life. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, a silence born not of peace, but of shock and revelation. Matt sat in a corner of the room, his body hunched over, the DNA report still trembling in his hands. The paper was damp from his tears, crumpled where his fingers had clenched too hard. He had read those lines over and over again until the words blurred together, but the truth never changed. The boy lying in that bed, the one he had hunted, poisoned, and sworn to destroy, was his son. His own flesh and blood. The reality of it hit him with a force so brutal that he couldn't breathe. Every act of vengeance, every sleepless night spent plotting Noah's death, now echoed back at him like screams in a hollow cave. He had not just tried to murder another man, he had tried to murder his own legacy, the only innocent piece of his life that had ever truly belonged to him. Sienna stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale as she watched Matt fall apart. For years she had believed they would build a family together. They had tried, again and again, to have a child, but fate had been cruel. Every attempt ended in loss, every doctor's visit another reminder of failure. She had longed to give him the joy of fatherhood, to fill the void that haunted him. But now, seeing the man she once loved crumble beneath the weight of the truth, she realized that destiny had played a far more twisted hand. The child Matt had always wanted had been there all along, not in her arms, but in the arms of the woman he hated most. The irony was unbearable. Sharon stood beside Noah's bed, her face streaked with tears, her voice trembling as she spoke. "It's over, Matt," she said softly, the exhaustion in her tone deeper than fear. "You can't undo the past, but you can stop destroying what's left of it. This has to end." Her words were not angry, they were pleading. She had known Matt once, not as the man he had become, but as the man she had loved. Before all the bitterness, before the years carved anger into his soul, they had shared something real. She remembered his gentleness, his quiet humor, the way his eyes used to soften when he talked about dreams that never came true. For a brief moment long ago, they had been happy, but like all things in Sharon's life, that happiness had been fleeting. Matt looked up at her, his face wet, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you tell me?" he choked. "All these years, why did you let me become this monster?" Sharon closed her eyes, the weight of guilt pressing on her chest. "Because I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of what you'd do. Afraid of who you'd become. And I was right." Her voice cracked, but she stood firm. "You loved me once, Matt. And I loved you. But that love died a long time ago. The only thing that matters now is Noah, and he doesn't need your vengeance. He needs peace." Her words hung in the air, fragile and final. Matt lowered his head, sobs shaking his body. For the first time in years, his anger dissolved into something human, regret. He turned toward Noah's bed, his trembling hand reaching out to touch his son's arm, but he stopped short. He didn't deserve that touch. The sight of Noah's pale face, the faint flutter of his eyelids, was more punishment than any prison could deliver. "I wanted a son," he murmured through tears. "I prayed for one every night. And when I finally found him, I tried to kill him." His voice broke completely, the sound raw and desperate. "How do I live with that?" The answer came in silence. Sharon said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The truth had burned everything, love, hatred, forgiveness, into ash. All that remained was a wounded family standing among the ruins of their secrets. The police took Matt away soon after, but this time he didn't resist. He walked quietly between the officers, head bowed, his mind lost somewhere between grief and disbelief. Sharon watched him go, her heart torn between hatred and compassion. She didn't know if she pitied him or despised him, but she knew that something inside him had shattered beyond repair. Hours later, when the hospital lights dimmed and the world outside fell silent, Noah began to stir. His body trembled faintly, a low groan escaping his lips as he tried to breathe on his own. Sharon rushed to his side, her tears returning, her hands clutching his. "Noah," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm here, baby. You're safe now." His eyelids fluttered open, unfocused, confused. The world around him blurred into white light and shadow, faces moving in and out of view. He saw his mother's face first, pale, red-eyed, trembling, and then Nick standing behind her, stoic but broken. "Mom, what happened?" he managed to murmur, his voice weak. Sharon hesitated. She didn't know how to tell him that the man who tried to end his life was the same man who had given it to him. She brushed his hair back gently, her voice soft as she said, "You're safe now. That's all that matters." But Noah's mind was already racing. He remembered flashes, the cold hands holding him down, the glint of the syringe, the eyes filled with hatred. "Matt," he whispered, the name a curse on his tongue. Sharon froze. Nick looked at her sharply, confusion in his eyes. Later, when Noah was strong enough to sit up, the truth came out, not because Sharon wanted to tell him, but because she couldn't lie to him anymore. He had the right to know who he was, even if it tore him apart. She told him everything, the affair that had happened years ago when she and Nick were separated, the brief but intense connection with Matt, and the child that came from it. She told him how she had realized the truth too late and kept it hidden to protect both him and Nick. Noah sat in silence, staring at her as the world he knew crumbled. "You mean, he's my father," he said finally, his voice hollow. Sharon nodded, tears falling. The silence that followed was unbearable. Noah's heart pounded in his chest, his mind spinning. The man who had haunted his nightmares, the man whose hatred nearly killed him, was his own blood. He wanted to scream, to deny it, but his body was too weak to carry the weight of that truth. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not true. Nick's my dad. He raised me. He's the only father I've ever had." Sharon reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. "You let me hate him," he said softly, his voice shaking. "You let him hate me." Sharon tried to explain, but he turned his face away. "Don't," he whispered. "Please don't." Nick, who had stood silent until then, stepped forward. He sat beside Noah and took his hand despite the resistance. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're my son. You always will be. Blood doesn't change that. I don't care what any test says." His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside him. He had loved Noah since the day he was born, had watched him grow, fall, rebuild, and now nearly die. No revelation could erase that. But as he spoke, Sharon saw the quiet ache in his eyes, the wound of betrayal, not just from her, but from the universe itself. For Noah, the revelation became a living nightmare. He couldn't close his eyes without seeing Matt's face, the face of a murderer, a man who had once been consumed by rage. How could that man be part of him? What if that darkness ran in his veins too? The thought tormented him. He told Sharon he needed time, space, anything to make sense of what he had learned. She agreed, knowing that pushing him would only deepen the pain. But she feared what that distance would mean, for her, for Nick, for the fragile thread that still connected them. Meanwhile, in his cell, Matt refused food, refused visitors. The DNA report lay beside his bed, the edges worn from constant handling. He would read it again and again, whispering Noah's name under his breath. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his son's face the night of the attack, pale, terrified, broken. The image consumed him. He wanted to believe that he could atone, that some form of redemption was still possible, but he knew that forgiveness was too much to ask. The law would punish him for his crimes, but the greater sentence was eternal, the knowledge that he had almost killed the only person who could have saved him from himself. Weeks later, Sharon visited him one last time. The guards hesitated, but she insisted. When she entered the small gray room, Matt barely looked up. "He's alive," she said softly, her voice trembling. "He's recovering." Matt's shoulders shook, a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh escaping him. "Good," he whispered. "That's good." Sharon studied him for a long moment. "You wanted a son," she said. "You have one. But he doesn't know if he can ever forgive you. Or me." Matt nodded slowly. "I don't deserve it," he said simply. Sharon stepped closer, her eyes full of pain. "You don't," she said honestly. "But maybe one day he'll find a way to understand. Maybe that's enough." Matt looked at her for the first time, his eyes hollow but soft. "Tell him," he began, but his voice broke. "Tell him I'm sorry." Sharon nodded. "I will." Then she turned and left, her steps echoing down the long corridor, leaving Matt alone with the truth that had both destroyed and defined him. Back in Noah's hospital room, the air felt lighter but emptier. He stared out the window at the city skyline, the sun just beginning to rise. Nick stood beside him, silent but steady.